Okay, recording in session. So NN15, incomplete records. So we have 4 further lessons to go. We'll be able to complete this, but I'll let you know whether this topic is coming in your January exams or not. If we can satisfactorily complete it, then it will come. Otherwise, suspense account तक आपका syllabus होगा. Okay, so incomplete records, as the name suggests, you will not have complete information. You will have bits and pieces of random information, and then you will make use of those bits and pieces to find out the missing information. Basically, this chapter, it's a very important topic for from examination point of view. But this topic doesn't have any unique content to itself. It's just basically, it's going to sum up everything that we have done so far. So this is your last chapter from proprietorship. Proprietorship is a business owned by one individual. So that means अभी तक हमने जितनी भी accounting पढ़ी है, उन सब में the business entity that we have been dealing with, that was one of the three main types of businesses: partnerships, proprietorships. Just a second. मैं एक और काम कर दूं जरा, 1 minute. Sorry, मेन्यू बार डिसेबल कर देता हूं. And I should enable do not disturb. Okay, now better. So proprietorships, which means one owner, right? Then the next phase that we will come across is going to be partnerships, where we have 2 to 20 owners, and then limited companies, where practically there is no limit of owners. So we are completing our first segment of the business entities, right? Proprietorships. This is the last chapter in proprietorship businesses. And in this particular chapter, we will deal with unusual circumstances, like कोई एक्सीडेंट हो जाता है, या कोई फ्रॉड हो जाता है, डेटा करप्ट हो जाता है, या डेटा किसी वजह से मिसिंग है. और जब वो डेटा मिसिंग होता है, तो फिर हम बाकी की इंफॉर्मेशन को यूज़ करते हुए कैसे हम we will find a way around. So in this chapter is like solving a puzzle. You're given some information and you will have to figure out the rest yourself. So we will be making use of whatever we have learned so far. We will use markups and margins, accounting ratios, जो हमने chapter number 3 में पढ़ी थी. We will be making use of control accounts and other double entry related procedures. And we will sort of learn how to improvise on whatever information that we are given, and to solve that puzzle. So let me give you an example. Then we'll start from there. So let's say you were in the process of making your income statement, and you have your sales revenue calculated, say $100,000. And your opening inventory is, say, $10,000, right? Your closing inventory of goods is, say, $12,000, right? And there are no other elements. The purchase's value is missing. It could be a possibility here that हो सकता है आपका purchase manager or procurement manager was a corrupt person, and you gave him some checks ताकि वो उनको कैश करके suppliers को payments करे. उसको cashier checks थे, and that person encashed all the checks, अब सारा कैश अपने पास रखता है, purchases record अपने पास रख लेता है, and takes a flight to Singapore maybe, ठीक है, and runs away with your money, right? And with this information, the purchases records are missing now, right? And if that is the case, you're kind of against a brick wall here. You can't really figure out how to go around it, because let's say if we are to make an income statement, right? So you have these sales here, right? 100,000. You subtract the cost of goods sold. You need the purchases value, and that purchases value is missing. You can't figure it out, because, or even if the remaining purchases records that you have, you cannot trust those records, because they must be corrupted anyway, because they were under the control of a corrupt person, a corrupt employee. So there is the purchases information is missing. Opening inventory is $10,000. Closing inventory subtract करेंगे हम, right? Less closing inventory, say $12,000, right? And obviously the cost of goods sold cannot be calculated, and therefore gross profit cannot be calculated either. And if gross profit is missing, then obviously you can't go further, calculate the net profit. So you are in a problem here, and so you call in a meeting कि अब हम इसको कैसे sort out करें, and your manager, your sales manager, comes up with an idea. He says that whatever selling prices that we have set so far during the year, all of these selling prices were set to earn a margin of 20%. Now, what do we mean by margin? Margin means that selling prices are set so that the profit of 20% on sales price will be earned, right? This is what margin is, right? When you say margin, इसको मैं simplify भी अभी कर देता हूँ, right? So margin is a trader's pricing policy. So margin 20% over here means that you set your selling prices in a way that you will be able to earn 20% profit on the selling price every time you sold the goods. So you can simplify it further that if margin 20% is given, that means that profit, or in this case, gross profit is 20% of sales revenue. So if we have observed setting of the selling prices in this specific manner, that means whatever selling prices we set, they were set in a way that you will always end up earning 20% of the selling price as profit. Then 20% margin means that gross profit is 20%. It should be equal to 20% of whatever your sales revenue was, right? So what we can do is we can revisit the statement here, right? So if our gross profit should be equal to 20% of sales revenue, and we have sales revenue, this is 20% here. So that means we can have our gross profit directly calculated without having to calculate cost of goods sold. Not just that, since we know that it's 20,000, so we can connect the dots going backwards, and we can find out this question mark. That means our cost of goods sold must be $80,000. And if cost of goods sold were $80,000, we can even go further backwards to figure out how much value of the purchases should be there in order to justify these results, right? So we will calculate the purchases in a bit, but for now, give me a green check if you understand how we use this accounting ratio called margin to figure out any missing elements. Alicia and Amal and Fajr and Minal. Fajr and Minal. Okay. So now if we are to calculate purchases here, so we can make a simple equation. We can assume purchases uh, as the unknown variable here. So purchases plus 10,000 of opening inventory minus 12,000 of closing inventory equals the cost of goods sold here, $80,000. We can make use of the how we calculate cost of goods sold here, and we can find out the missing value of purchases. And this is how we can also figure out how much embezzlement our procurement or purchase manager has made. So we can solve this here. P will be $80,000 plus $12,000 minus $10,000. So that would be $82,000. So we can always find the value of purchases this way as well. So this can fill in the last gap in our information. So this is $82,000, right? So give me another green check if you understand how to go back and calculate the purchases value, right? Alicia has asked a question. Acha, $80,000 once more. Okay, ठीक है, I'll do that. ठीक है, फजर एंड मिनाल. मेरीन को भी नहीं समझ आया. मेरीन को आ गया. ठीक है, फजर एंड मिनाल are non-responsive. Okay. Acha, Alicia, how do we calculate the 80,000? Alicia, can we, do you agree with this part here? We derived it from the margin. If margin is 20%, that means our gross profit should be equal to 20% of the sales revenue. Yes or no? Right. Got it. So if gross profit is equal to 20% of sales revenue here, and we already have sales here, right? So if we take 20% of sales revenue, we can find out the gross profit equal to $20,000. Yes or no? Good. So if gross profit is $20,000 and sales revenue is $100,000, that leads us to this conclusion that our cost of goods sold must be $80,000. Yes or no? Got it. And if $80,000 is our cost of goods sold, and that is made up of purchases plus the opening inventory and less the closing inventory, we can always work it backwards from here to find out $82,000 of purchases. That's how we do it, right? Good. Alicia, very good. So this is one of the countless examples where we are going to use information, part of the information in an incomplete record situation to figure out the missing part. So it's going to be a difficult chapter for some, but at the same time, it's going to be a very interesting chapter because we will be solving lots and lots of puzzles here, mathematical puzzles, right? Just like that. Now, let me give you another example here, right? So, before the next example, let me explain the second way in which traders can describe their pricing policies. So pricing policies, let me just make a little mind map here. A pricing policy is a policy that every trading business or every business should follow. They should have a clear-cut policy that how they are going to be deciding on what prices to charge their customers. In some countries, it is required by the government as well that every business should have a clear-cut pricing policy. And that pricing policy has two ways of expressing them. The first one we have seen that. We call it margin. In that case, selling prices are set based on profit being X% of selling price, right? जैसे इस केस में हमने 20% margin को translate किया था कि profit should be 20% of the selling price. Selling price is the singular, sales revenue is the plural of selling price, right? When we talk about one product, then we say selling price per unit. When we talk about the entire lot, we say sales revenue, right? That's the plural of that. Similarly, profit is singular and gross profit is the plural. When we talk about profit per unit, we are talking about one unit in isolation. But when we are talking about the whole lot, the profit earned out of the sale of this particular lot or inventory is what we call gross profit. So margin is X% of the selling price. And the other way we can describe the pricing policy is called markup. Markup, right? And margin. These are the two ways of describing a trader's pricing policy. In markup, profit is X% of cost. Actually, can you just give me a minute? The bell ring कर रही है बाहर and घर पे कोई है नहीं इस वक्त for help. Just let me find out who's at the door. Just a second. Recording unpaused. Okay, so markup is the other way where we are going to express the pricing policy. So markup और margin में कोई फर्क नहीं है. ठीक है, अगर margin X% of selling price है, then markup को हम X% of cost. So basically these are two different ways of measuring the profit. It doesn't matter which way you choose, it will eventually lead to the same results. But markup simply measures profit with respect to cost of the goods, and margin represents or margin measures the profits with respect to cost of, with respect to sales revenue. For example, if this is the summary of the previous income statement, our cost of goods sold was, say, let's say $80,000, and that leads to the gross profit $20,000. So you would agree that in this case, margin is 20% and markup would be 25%. Okay? Margin expresses this profit with respect to sales, right? So if you want to calculate margin out of this set of information, you would say margin is 20%, but markup represents profit with respect to cost, right? So in this case, if profit is $20,000 and cost of goods sold or cost in this case is $80,000, then profit is 1/4 of the cost, or simplified as 25%. Do you agree that margin 20% and markup 25%, it means the same thing? They both mean $20,000 of gross profit. Give me a green check if you understand this part, right? They may give you different numerical values. Margin says 20%, markup says 25%, but eventually they both mean the same gross profit, $20,000. Alina said नहीं समझ आया, कोई बात नहीं, मैं अभी explain करता हूँ, right? Okay. Maheen, Marine, Minal, and Misha. Minal, are you there? Minal is not responding. Okay. ठीक है, मैं अभी explain करता हूँ, ठीक है. So let's revisit margin. Margin means profit expressed as X% of sales or selling prices, and markup means profit expressed as X% of the cost, right? Or in this case, cost of goods sold. Okay, let me selling price or sales revenue. मैं साथ साथ singular and plural दोनों mention कर रहा हूँ, right? ठीक है. So if we are to calculate margin here, so since margin expresses profit as a percentage of selling prices or sales revenue, so the profit is 20,000 over sales 100,000, that will give you 20%, right? So that's why margin comes out to be 20% here, right? but markup expresses profit as a percentage of cost. So cost is $80,000. So profit expressed as a percentage of cost, वो कितने percent बनता है? So 20,000 over 80,000 is 1/4, which means 25%, right? ठीक है. Or let me just make it, margin can be calculated as gross profit over sales multiplied by 100, and markup can be calculated as gross profit over cost of goods sold times 100, right? So that should solve it, right, Alina? And Alina Kothamasta, or I think Marine, I don't know. Yep, Marine, got it. Okay, Alina and Marine, yes. Okay. So that's how margins are calculated and markups are calculated. Now let me give you a little troublesome issue here, right? Let's see if you can solve this, right? Let's say our sales were $200,000, right? Our opening inventory was say $5,000. The closing inventory is say $10,000, right? And markup is given to us as 50%, right? Now, if this is the situation, right? Again, we are not given the value of purchases. Purchases value is missing over here. The fundamental, this is maybe कोई virus, computer virus आया, उसकी वजह से आपके hard drive खराब हो गई और आपके पास purchases records missing है. Or again, कोई corruption होगी, कोई fraud हो गया, कोई embezzlement होगी, whatever the reason is, fire, floods, you will come across all sorts of situations in incomplete records. So whatever the reason was, you don't have the purchase records, but you have your pricing policy, 50%, that you have been following consistently through the year. So let's see if we can make use of markup here. So we start with our income statement sales, right? We put sales value here, $200,000. Then we subtract the cost of goods sold, right? Purchases is obviously missing here. We don't have that purchases value, right? Then we do have the opening inventory, right? $5,000, and we have the closing inventory here, $10,000, right? But since the purchases amount is not given, we don't have, that's the missing element here. That's the incomplete record, right? So we can not calculate our cost of goods sold either, which means we cannot find our gross profit here, right? This gross profit here. However, we do have 50% markup. So can you write a sentence for the meaning of this 50%? What do you understand by 50% markup? Jaise margin was that profit is X% of sales revenue. What do we mean by markup? Do you agree that in this case, markup here means that profit is 50% of what? 50% of the cost of goods sold. Yes, very good, Alicia, very good, Alina, right? It's 50% of cost of goods sold, right? So that means 50% of the cost of goods sold, but we come across another brick wall. For example, if we write here, profit is 50% of the cost of goods sold, but the problem over here is the cost of goods sold itself is missing. Yes, Asma, excellent, right? 50% of cost of goods sold. Now, can you think of a way? See, this is not accounting. This is more of solving a riddle here, right? So you have $200,000 of sales revenue. The cost of goods sold is missing because of the purchases value is gone. And obviously gross profit is a dependent variable here, right? But we have a hint that our pricing policy has remained consistent at 50% markup. That means that our gross profit should be equal to 50% of the cost of goods sold. But when we come to apply that hint here, the cost of goods sold itself is not available. How do we sort out this riddle? Any ideas? We can convert markup into margin. That's one solution. Very good. Very good, Alicia. Yes, because we know that margin expresses profit with respect to sales revenue, and sales revenue is given. So one solution Alicia has suggested is that we should convert markup into equivalent margin, and then we can express that gross profit is X% of sales revenue, and then we can sort it out just like the previous example, right? Any other ideas? An easier idea? Alicia is suggesting something which involves one-step calculation, but there is an easier, simple first-degree equation. You can apply simple algebra here, and you can figure it out. Let me explain both. Let me explain what I prefer, which is the easier way. And I will also describe Alicia's method here. Alicia also says that's a very relevant method, right? I'll explain it both. So let's start with the first one. What happens? Yes, Maheen. Okay, Maheen's got it. Excellent. Everyone, please refer to Maheen's response in the chat. If we take cost of goods sold at X, Maheen says, assume this value as X. And if this is X, then this must be 0.5X, right? Yes, of course, Amal. That is what Maheen is suggesting. Of course, Amal. We are going to make this equation. You can see on the screen now. You can see on the screen now what Maheen is suggesting, that if we assume this missing value, cost of goods sold, as X, and Amal is saying that we can make an equation out of it, and that equation should look like this. $200,000 of sales revenue minus X should be equal to 0.5X. 0.5X. That is what Amal is suggesting, and I have used Maheen and Amal's references here. Give me a green check if you agree with this equation. Right. Sales minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit, right? And markup is telling us that profit is 50% of cost of goods sold. So that means if you assume cost of goods sold as X, then profit must be 0.5X. Yes or no, Fajr? Okay, good. So let's solve this equation and find the X. So 200,000 equals this X goes on to the other side and gets added. So 0.5X plus X, right? And $200,000 would be 1.5X, and X would be 200,000 divided by 1.5. वो कितना बनता है? Anyone? 200,000 divided by 1.5. 133,333. So basically we got the X here as 133,333, right? What is X? X is the cost of goods sold here, right? So we can replace this X here as 133,333, right? And that means we should have our gross profit as 66,667, right? And if that is the case, that means what should be the value of purchases, right? You can again assume the value of purchases as X. So your equation should be X plus 5,000 minus 10,000 equals 133,333, right? That should be the equation, and you can find the missing X value as purchases. Yes? Can you find out the purchase value and tell me? $138,333. So purchases must be 138,333. So that is how we fill in those missing elements. Now let's try what Alicia suggested earlier on, right? Let me create a fresh statement here. Alicia suggested here that if markup is given as 50%, and if we can calculate margin, equivalent margin here, that could also be a solution to the problem, right? So how can we convert? If one is given, we can always find the other one, right? Right. So let's convert it into a simple fraction here, 50 over 100, yes or no? And if we go back to this part here, you can see markup means gross profit in the numerator and cost of goods sold in the denominator, right? That's what markup is. So if we convert markup into a simple fraction, then the numerator suggests gross profit and the denominator suggests cost of goods sold. So if we can come back here, we can identify this 50% is representing gross profit. 50 in numerator में जो है वो gross profit को represent कर रहा है और ये denominator में cost of goods sold को represent कर रहा है. Give me a green check if we understand how to identify numerator and denominator in the case of markup. Okay, so give me your answer in the chat. If that is the case, if gross profit is 50, cost of goods sold is 100, we assume these values, how much should the sales be? So if that is the case, this 50 is gross profit and 100 is cost of goods sold. Do you agree that selling price or sales revenue should be 150, sorry? Yes, 150, everyone. 50 over 200,000. नहीं अभी हम 200,000 को नहीं, हम सिर्फ इन फ्रैक्शंस को आइसोलेशन में देख रहे हैं अभी, ना, राइट? अगर हम सिर्फ और सिर्फ इस पर्टिकुलर पार्ट को, लेट्स नॉट वरी अबाउट द प्रीवियस वैल्यूज, we just learning how to convert markup into margin, as Alicia suggested, right? So if 50% is the markup, we express it into a simple fraction, which means 50 over 100. Then we identify the numerator and the denominator, right? And then connecting these two, we arrive at this conclusion that if $100 की कॉस्ट के गुड्स आप बेचें और आपको $50 का प्रॉफिट हो, तो इसका मतलब है you must have sold them at $150. Yes or no? That's what I give me a fresh feedback now. That the sales revenue must be $150 if these are the isolated values we are assuming for our analysis here. Fajr and Hadia and Matiha and Misha. Okay, Misha. Okay, good, right? So now we know that margin, how do we define margin? Margin is gross profit over sales, right? That's how we define margin, gross profit expressed as a percentage of sales. So now we know we can write it down as gross profit हमें पता 50 है, और now we know that sales are 150. So we can always convert this as a ratio. So if markup is 50 over 100, right? If markup is 50 over 100, margin is 50 over 150, right? Do you agree with this result? Margin ka. Give me a green check. Very good. And Fajr, yes or no? Fajr, yes. Okay. And that means if this is equal to 50%, what does this mean? This means 33.33333%. Yes or no? Give me another green check. 1/3, 50 over 150 simply means 1/3. So 1/3 is 33%, 33.33333%, right? Yes. Yes, Fajr? You have raised your hand. You need to ask a question. Okay, good. Right. So that means we can always make use of the connection between the numerator and the denominator to find out if markup is given, we can always find out margin. And if margin is given, we can always find out markup. Let's say margin is given here, right? Margin is given as 20%. And we wanted to calculate markup, right? How do we do this? Again, the same principle. 20 over 100, we will first convert the percentage into a simple fraction, right? Then we will identify what do we mean by numerator and what do we mean by denominator. Numerator must represent gross profit. Denominator represents the sales revenue because it's margin, right? Margin expresses gross profit as a percentage of sales. So denominator में हमेशा sales होगा. So फिर हम इसको आपस में connect करेंगे. अच्छा, अगर $20 की आपको profit हो रहा है और आपने $100 में वो goods sell out किए थे, that means the cost of goods sold must be $80, right? Yes or no? A green check here will do, right? Do you agree that cost of goods sold should be 80? Minal and Mehreen? Okay, so if cost of goods sold is 18, we can always use that connection here. Markup means gross profit over cost of goods sold. And now we have these values. So that means gross profit is, that means gross profit is 20 and cost of goods sold is 80. So this results in a 20% margin. This must make 25%. Yes or no? So we calculated 25%. So 20% margin is equivalent to 25% markup. Give me a green check if you understand that. Fajr and Minal. Okay, good. So now we can summarize these results. This can be a little confusing in the beginning. So let's now standardize the formulas here. Sorry, Fajr. Okay, maybe Fajr का गलती से mic unmute हो गया था, कोई नहीं. So now we can simplify this. If markup is A over B, right? Like in this case, you can see numerator is A and denominator is B, right? Then if we are to convert markup into margin, it should be A over B plus A, right? You can see A remains the same as 50 and denominator becomes B plus A, right? So we can sort of simplify our analysis into a simple equation. If markup is A over B, margin should be A over B plus A. Yes or no? Right? Elena say it? Yes? Misha? Misha? Yes or no? Okay, good. And similarly, doing the same thing, if margin is A over B, then markup should be A over B minus A, right? Do you agree with this? You can see if markup was 20 over 100, then, margin was 20 over 100, then markup was 20 over 80, which was 100 minus 20, 80, right? Give me a green check, right? Minal, yes? Okay, good. So Alicia, that is how we can convert markup into margin or margin to markup, depending on the situation. So you can always make use of this conversion, or you can make use of an equation where you can assume the missing information as X, and then you can work it backwards. Any of the two will lead you to the same results. So whichever you prefer, that's a choice. That's completely up to you, right? So now, with this in mind, go to you can say example number 12 on page 167. Page 167, example 12, right? Page 167, example 12. These are solved examples. So I'll give you 5 minutes to go through it. And if you understand the solution, then leave a green check, and आहिस्ता आहिस्ता हम level of difficulty में बढ़ाते जाएंगे. So example 11 and example 12 are similar, but example 11 is simple markup और margin calculation पे है, वो भी आप देख लें, वो भी देख लें, example 11 भी देख लें. 167 पेज पे पहले example 11 हम देखते हैं. अगर आपको example 11 में कोई issues नहीं है तो पहले उसको हम let's get it over with. So example 11 पे आप मुझे feedback देंगे, just go through it and let me know if you agree with the answers of that example 11. And if you do, then a green check on the participants window. Okay, Alina, Waqas, and Maheen agree with the answers of example 11. Example 11 is solved right there. If you agree with the solution, give me a green check. Mehreen agrees, Madhiya agrees. Good. Iman agrees. Fajr also agrees. Asma, Amna Kashif. Very good. Very good. It's okay, Amal. And Minal and Misha. Amal, we don't agree? Okay, we do. Now, on example 12, वो भी आप खुद से देखें. Example number 12. Example 12 is again solved there. See if you agree with the solution given. If you don't have any issues, again, give me a green check. Oops. Maheen agrees. Good. Okay, everyone. Shabash. If you don't agree, then a red cross and I will explain the answer. Hadia and Fajr and Alicia. Hadia, we don't agree? Okay, we do. Okay, now comes the bigger one. Example 13. I recommend you don't look at the answer, you solve it. You try to solve it yourself and then compare your answer with example 13's answer. It's a tricky one. right? We don't have a uniform margin in example number 13. You can see it says half the sales were made at a margin of 25%, one third of the sales were made at a margin of 20%, and the remaining were made at a margin of 10%. It's going to be a little tough. Let's see if you can figure it out. If you don't, then a red cross. I'm looking forward to see a red cross here. Okay, you have 5 minutes to go through it. You don't understand it, a red cross. If you do, then a green check, obviously, but I'm looking forward to a red cross over here because it's going to be a little troublesome to calculate. Example 13. We get it? If you closing inventory is missing, you can take closing inventory as X. So purchases plus opening inventory minus X equals cost of goods sold. That's the equation you will make to solve. Okay. Okay, Lena, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. You got all the missing information without making an income statement. That's fine. But actually, with more experience, you will see that by drawing an income statement, you will have an additional advantage. We will see it in the next example there. But if you calculate it otherwise, it's fine. It's perfectly fine. Marina's got it too. Alina Sayed got it. Okay, very good. Hadia's got it. Maheen and Madiha have got it. Very good. It's okay. Take your time. Okay, lots and lots of tick marks. Very good. It's okay. अमल and ईमान, अगर नहीं समझ आएगा अमल तो मुझसे आपने रेड क्रॉस देना है, आपने प्रेशर में आके ग्रीन चेक नहीं देना, ओके? अगर नहीं समझ आ रहा तो okay, good. Let me explain it another way. I'm glad somebody did give me a red cross. Okay, so I'm just going to solve the gross profit. The rest is just fill in the blanks type of situation, right? So our sales are given as, let's say, Alina, मैं income statement बना के कर रहा हूँ तो it will be easier. You can see that. So if we solve this example with example 15 here, okay, your sales are, in this case, not given. नहीं, sales are given. नहीं, yes, sales is given. $122,000. And then you also have your sales returns, right? So we subtract sales returns. That's a good way of starting with an incomplete record question. You start making an income statement and you fill in all the information which is given and leave out spaces which are for values which are missing. Okay, Amal says I understand calculating margin differently, but I'm not getting the same gross profit. Okay, let me figure it out. Okay, so then the second is you make the cost of goods sold calculations. Let's see what information we are given. Purchases is $90,000, right? Then we have carriage inwards. Okay, very good. Carriage inwards भी है हमारे पास इस बार हमारे पास ज़्यादा detailed information है. So carriage inwards is $1,000, right? And then there is opening inventory, right, that we add, right? There are no purchase returns. अगर होती तो हम ज़रूर लिखते, लेकिन purchase returns नहीं है. So opening inventory is there, which is $10,000, right? And the closing inventory is missing. Obviously, that is the missing element here. And that means the cost of goods sold cannot be calculated. And that means the gross profit is missing here, but we have margins given, right? And we know that margin is profit expressed as a percentage of sales revenue, right? Now, what is the sales revenue here? This is not the sales revenue here. Sales revenue is this value, $120,000. This is the total amount of goods which we sold. And out of that, $2,000 were returned. So that means our income from sale of goods is different. So sale of goods is $122,000, but income generated by sale of goods is $120,000. So that is the value that we are going to use to calculate margins. Okay. So $120,000 is your total sales revenue. That is why we don't use the term sales. We always use the term sales revenue, income generated from sales. So sales revenue is $120,000, and that revenue or that income from sales were generated in three different ways, right? Half the sales, which were $60,000 sales revenue, right? This sales revenue was earned at a margin of 25%, right? Then 1/3, ये half वाला part है, ये 1/3 वाला part आ जाएगा. 1/3 is $40,000 of sales revenue that was earned at a margin of 20%, right? And the remaining would be 120,000 minus 60,000 minus 40,000, that leaves us with the remaining here, remaining sales, which is obviously $20,000. They were earned at a margin of 10%, right? This is the condition given to us, right? So now we can find out 25% margin means profit is 25% of the sales revenue. So that will come out to be $15,000. That's your profit right here. Plus this profit is $8,000. Plus this profit is $2,000, right? So now you have all the three profits together as $25,000, right? That is your gross profit. Yes, Amal, we get it? Good. So now you fill in gross profit here as, and you'll put working one here. This is your working one, right? Just like depreciation when working references diya karte the, right? So you have $25,000 of sales, and then working backwards, this must be 120 minus 25 is $95,000, right? And if this is $95,000, now you can assume this value as X and make an equation and find the value of X, right? You understand how to find the closing inventory? जो भी missing element होगा, when all else fails, you will invoke the X variable and find it out, right? Okay, everyone, give me a final feedback here. We understand how to calculate the missing value of closing inventory, right? And Alina Sayed, it's always a good idea to organize all of these values in the form of an income statement. That helps you to think clearly, right? Because when you make income statement, you will come across some other missing elements as well, जो कि आपके पास pretty clearly ना दिया, right? Good. So one last thing, and we call it off, and that will be example 14. आप खुद से कर लेंगे. Example 15. Example 15 is almost exactly the same as example 13. The only difference is that instead of margins, we have markups. So let's take 5 minutes and see if we can figure it out. Make a mind map. इस तरह का एक cementing map बना लेना आप, so it will be easier for you to think, right? If you have your cost of goods sold split into parts, earning different markups, then make a cementing map like that. Okay, let's start. And then after this example 15, we will call it off. Once you have understood the answer, then give me a green check here. And again, I recommend that instead of just justifying the answer, do your own working first. Solve it yourself first, and then see if your answer is matching with the answer given in the example 15. If it does, then leave a green check. Alina Vakas understood. Very good, Alina. Let's wait for your friends. Then I have an important announcement to make at the end of the lesson. Just stay around. Don't leave. Maheen got it. Amal got it. Alicia got it. Very good. Marine got it. Iman also got it. Asma as well as Amna. Very good. Fajr को भी समझ आ गई. Hadia को भी आ गई. Minal and Alina Sayed. Minal, Alina Sayed got it. Okay, Minal got it too. Okay, so this was the introduction to incomplete records. We only used one particular tool to uh, to find the missing information, and that was the accounting ratios. The accounting ratios that we discussed was markup and margin, and these accounting ratios generally describe the trader's pricing policy. So we can make use of the pricing policy to find out any missing elements in the trading account section of income statement. So अभी हम इसके बाद और भी different tools देखेंगे. ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हमेशा markup and margin के through ही problem solve होगी. There are other tools that we will discuss in the next few days, like control accounts भी आएंगे आगे. So we will discuss those on Mondays. But I think the next week is going to be our last week before the December break. And the next week is going to be our last time on Zoom, because as per school's policy, we have to stop using Zoom and we'll have to move on Google Meet. So the school will be sharing your official new IDs with the LGS domain. और फिर वो जब हम जनवरी में रिज्यूम करेंगे आफ्टर द नेक्स्ट वीक में हम जूम पे ही काम करेंगे एज वी आर डूइंग, बट unfortunately Zoom has to go now. So next week will be our last week on Zoom. के बाद जब हम जनवरी में रिज्यूम करेंगे तो फिर जनवरी के अंदर Google Meet, which is the other platform that we use, हम उसको यूज़ करेंगे. It's not as good as Zoom, but what needs to be done is something. We will have revision class during holidays discussing our problems. Yes, anytime, Alicia. वो classes के अंदर attendance नहीं हुआ करेगी, वो additional classes होंगे, so you can always tell me कि आपको कौन से topics हमने मेरे ख्याल decide किए थे. I think depreciation was one topic, and I don't know, whatever topics that you want to discuss, we can have additional classes. We will continue to use Zoom until January. January में फिर जब हम exams के बाद हम अपनी classes resume करेंगे, and provided these are online classes, then we will be using Google Meet. Okay, चलो फिर I'll see you on Monday, and have a good weekend. Khuda Hafiz. Thank you, Asma. Khuda Hafiz.